Episode of Google Developers Live. My name is Arun Nagarajan, and we're actually coming live from our London studios. I'm usually in the Google Apps developer relations team, and you probably have seen me from the New York office and Mountain View office before, but it's my very first trip to London, and today's episode is extra special because we have an engineer from our team.
Hi, I'm Nick Johnson from the AdSense API team right here in London. The AdSense API gives you programmatic access to your AdSense account.
Excellent. And it's actually, I should say, sunny in London, which is, I was surprised by. I think I packed a lot of sweaters and jackets that I don't need, which is good.
I think we were all surprised by that.
And you said you were at a ski trip where it was warmer.
Yeah, it was warmer in the ski resort than it was in London.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here. Today's episode is extra special because what we do is the series called Scripted, which basically is all about using AppScript in interesting and innovative ways where you can build something that you may not normally think about with AppScript. So AppScript is all about taking Google Apps and doing more with it, whether it's extending the UI to show a menu within spreadsheets or taking the data from spreadsheets and exposing that to another service into Drive, for instance, or automating things. So every half hour, check for an email from a particular person and then alert me if something interesting happens. So integrate, extend, and automate are sort of the three things about AppScript that are quite common in different apps that we've seen, workflow apps and so on. But AdSense, which is actually, I'm not super familiar with, and I kind of caught up with Nick earlier to figure out what all the product is about and what the API is for. And if you can kind of walk through what the product is for and what the API is all about, that'd be really good.
Okay, well, AdSense is a monetization solution. Lets you monetize your website based on ads.
That's great.
Very simple, very straightforward.
So if I'm a blog publisher, I would want to drop in AdSense into my page if I'm producing content.
If you're a small blog publisher, as I myself am, you can just very easily fire up an AdSense account, stick a small ad on your blog, and receive a check in the post.
That's
to
great.
Some extent.
That's can't complain. And then what's the API all about? Why is there an API? And can you show a little bit about the API?
Basically there are essentially two main use cases we think of for the API. The first is if you're a larger organization which is using AdSense and you have a need to use your own dashboards, your own systems, you don't want to use the AdSense front end as it is, you can use the API to pull in your reporting and inventory data. Secondly, you might be a developer who's building a mobile app or a desktop app, a web app. So if you look in the iOS or Google Play stores, you'll see plenty of examples of those as well.
Cool. So a lot of folks are already using the API heavily. Excellent. And so can you show where someone can learn more about AdSense? Yep.
Well, if you look on the Google Developers page here, you can find the AdSense services from within Maestro AppScript.
Yep.
So as you can see, we have a fairly comprehensive set of documentation for that.
And to be clear, there's AdSense has two APIs. The API that we expose from AppScript is the AdSense Management API, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Got it, yep.
We also have a second product, the AdSense Host API, but that's not really relevant here. That's a different product entirely.
Great. And can you point out the page again? It's under apps-script/service AdSense. That's right.
AdSense, that's
under
correct,
developers.google.com. So it's pretty easy to find. So can you show a little bit about the code and what can be done?
Okay, well, what we have here is a fairly simple example we put together using AppScript. So if I just go over to an example AdSense account, I have a spreadsheet here, ordinary spreadsheet.
Yeah, let's take a look at the screen.
I'll just roll up my sleeves and you'll notice that there's actually an extra, those of you who are familiar with Google Docs spreadsheet, there's an extra menu on the right here, which we've added using AppScript. So I have new report, refresh report, which I'll come to shortly, and then a couple of preset reports from the AdSense front end. So if I hit overview last month, I'll think about it for a moment, fill in some columns and start date. So what I have here is I pulled up a very basic report of your account for the previous month. So you have dates, number of ad requests, coverage, which is
and it knew which account to dial into because who you were logged in the spreadsheet.
Yeah, it uses the account you're logged into as the spreadsheet.
So you didn't have to re-authenticate or anything.
Nope, none of that at all. And if you didn't want to use one of the presets, I can hit New Report, and I've built a very basic kind of UI which lets you assemble it. But if
That's
I move away from that for a moment, and this is one of the cool things which you're able to do with AppScript was if I realize actually this wasn't the data I wanted at all. I didn't want last month, I wanted the last 2 months. So remembering how American dates work. If I change that to a 2, and then I just come up here and refresh this report, give it a moment to think, and just like that, there's no further data. So that wasn't the best
all the
example.
money was made in the last month.
All the money was made in the last month here. So let me try something else instead. Let's decide instead. Let's say I'm not interested in ad requests at all, but I am interested in how much money was made by each of the different ad clients or products which we used here. So if I just change this to ad client ID, hit enter, and refresh the report, I now have the same data, but
that's really cool. So what you've been able to do there is the header actually corresponds to fields in the API. Is that correct, technically speaking?
Yes.
But as far as the user is concerned, they're just deciding which column to see.
Exactly. It's just
and
a spreadsheet.
That's great.
And I can actually, we added as well as another neat little thing we were able to do is I've got a help thing here, which we figured why not just use a spreadsheet. So we have a list of all the different dimensions and metrics which you can use.
So is that a hidden sheet, or is that something that automatically populate?
This is generated on the fly by the AppScript itself.
Very cool. Very cool. So how does this magic work? So what would you have to do to pull this all together? Can you reveal your tricks?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm glad you asked it.
Wasn't set up at all.
So if I just, actually, I shouldn't, why don't I just take a step back and say Tools, Script Editor here. So if I move over to that window now, I've blown the text up nice and big so you can see it. First of all, this gives away some of the magic right away. On the left-hand side, you will see the names of dimensions and metrics here. And on the right-hand side, I've put more kind of friendly English versions of them, which is what's used to generate the help page.
Got it. That makes sense. So you have a map of what makes sense to the user versus what the API uses.
Precisely.
Got it. Okay, cool.
And then I have them ordered as well, just to simplify.
What that's also good for is you could localize it potentially, right? So you could potentially have a Spanish version or French version where they may type in what makes sense to them in that locale. If that matches up to the same tag, then you'll get the right data.
Yes, although that would actually, that would work to some extent. Although some of the slightly cheesier hacks I've used here probably wouldn't work in that case, but we'll come to those later.
But that's a potential exercise for the viewer.
And then just here I have, these are the lists of dimensions and metrics which are used for the overview reports, which you saw on the menu. And then second, I use one of the special functions that's available in AppScript on open. So essentially this method runs immediately as soon as you open the spreadsheet.
That's right. That's a trigger in AppScript parlance. Yep.
So this creates the magical AdSense menu.
That's great.
Which you saw earlier.
And I've also see that you're programmatically building that array instead of populating it in a big chunk. It's much easier to read this way.
Yes.
Everybody has a different way to do that menu population, and it's interesting to see how you've done it.
Yeah, this seemed, for me, this kind of corresponds more closely to what actually pops up, but I guess that would be different for everyone.
And you're also using separators to clean up your UI a little bit. I think that's a trick that a lot of folks may not know of, but if you pass in null into a menu object instead of a name and function name property, you'll actually get a nice clean separator instead of, and I've seen some people actually use hyphens and dashes to clean up menus, but we actually have a nice trick for that. So.
I'll go back to the script now.
So now so far you've shown the API parameters to English literal mapping and how the menus are set up. Where's some of the magic happening?
And then just a little bit more magic on install, which just triggers the menu to appear should you install
from the gallery.
From the gallery. And then we have a whole bunch of kind of utility methods which create dates for, and then these are the methods which actually create the default reports. A couple of little total and average things there. And actually, if I'm going to do this sort of upside down.
A lot of code in there.
It's a big script.
Magic is not easy.
Yeah. Actually, I'll show you there right at the bottom. We have the get help method here.
That's a nice trick as well for our viewers that may want to do something that's spreadsheet based. And if you're just distributing all the content through a script, it's a great way, I think, to show help.
Yeah. So this literally just creates a new spreadsheet, uses the lists which you saw and maps you saw right at the top, and populates the spreadsheet using those. It's fairly
cool.
There's nothing super clever happening there. And then the actual magic as such, the bit that my manager would describe sneeringly as magic, the bit that pulls out the column names is here, and it's fairly simple. We just iterate along the top row of the spreadsheet using the data range, and then look for the right edge, which I'll come back to. And then every value it finds, it replaces spaces with underscores and converts it to uppercase.
Cool.
Which lets you choose your own capitalization as long as it's in about the right form for the...
so that essentially normalizes the headers into something that's more systemic. Yeah.
And then we attempt to find an entry in either the list of metrics or dimensions at the top. And if we find one, then we build that, turn that into a request which is made to the API. And if we don't, we do something else, which I'll just demonstrate. So if I type something which is not a dimension or metric here, and then refresh the report, it turns red, because that is
Could you zoom in a little bit, Nick? That's actually kind of cool too. So that's a nice way to not block the user, but you just tell them that I did not populate this column.
Precisely, yeah.
Cool. That's great.
So I'll go back to the code now. And then, having iterated through those, we've already gathered through that what the right-hand edge of the actual columns which was entered was. So then we look along the right edge for the words start date and end date, and use the cells to the right of those to pull those numbers out.
And that could have been a pop-up. If in this case, it's not unobtrusive to have it in a cell.
Yeah, we just sort of, we liked the idea that it was the more magic, essentially.
How does it know?
Yeah, magic spreadsheet was the code name if this had one.
That's funny.
And then, if I can actually find this in my own code, why don't I take advantage
of the new search features
of that, find the wrong thing.
It's also harder to navigate at that zoom level that you have. One of the things that Nick is finding that I'll talk about is the reason some of this data makes sense in spreadsheets is that it gives you an immediate charting interface. So a lot of folks take this tabular data and are able to build line graphs and pie charts and other scatter plots that may make sense based on the data that they care for. So it's actually interesting that it's not just the data you're able to acquire, but some intelligence from viewing that data. You could archive it. You could have it published automatically to a Google site or an internal portal. So there's a lot of nice things that you can do once you get it into a spreadsheet or hook into it with AppScript.
And and the final bit of magic happens here, where it drops the data it gets from AdSense right back into the report. Does a little bit of cleverness here and there, but nothing really special.
Cool. So one thing that we failed to mention earlier was the way you get access to the AdSense API is by enabling external Google APIs. We're not actually going to show that panel because that contains the API key that we used for this demo. But if you could just quickly show where you are, where in the menu it is. Oh, and also there's a really good tutorial that we have which walks you through a lot of details on how do you set this up. In this case, it shows you how the charts work as well. And this actually is a different set of code and all about automation versus some of the stuff that Nick is showing here, which is about dynamically populating a spreadsheet with parameters that are purely column header based rather than you knowing what the API is all about and all the details about. So this spreadsheet you could put in front of a business user that's used to various reporting solution, doesn't know what API stands for, and they're able to use this.
Yeah, the whole idea behind this example was something simple that your average or ordinary AdSense user could very easily just sit down, plug data into, and have their data just pop up in a spreadsheet.
That's great. Can you pull up the tutorial again that's there today? Yeah, this is it. Yeah. So in this tutorial, there are a couple of sections that are really important. One is the getting an API key. So you need to go to what we call the developer console. And it's actually a really straightforward process. The reason we need this is to track the utilization of the API against your account, just to make sure that no one person is disproportionately using the API and affecting other users. And so we can't show you the console because that reveals our API key. So you'd want to track your own and keep it safe as well. But it's actually really straightforward. And if you just follow the tutorial that we have today under our tutorial section, that'll show you a lot of the details on how do you get an API key and where do you paste it. AdSense is one of those special Google APIs that you see under, I believe it's Tools, Use Google APIs. And you get a pop-up and you're able to toggle on the right APIs you care for. And once you do that, autocomplete will now have AdSense dot and then all the class names. What is probably the most important AdSense class that someone needs to know about, or a method?
Probably.
Let's take a look at the screen here again.
If I just flip back
to the documentation is a great way to show that.
Yep. I can actually just talk a little bit about each of the concepts we have here.
That'll be really helpful, yeah.
So I mentioned before inventory and reporting. So we've only really talked about reporting here. But something also important which feeds into that is what we call ads inventory. So you have ad clients, which are essentially the products you use. So if you have a blog, that's called AdSense for content. You can also monetize a search engine on your blog. This is AdSense for search. There's AdSense for mobile search, AdSense for video, AdSense for games. There are a bunch of these.
So no content left behind.
No one. Below each of those, you have a set of ad units, which are your actual ads. These are the kind of the server-side association to the actual code you put on your page.
Got it.
You have custom channels, which you see here, which are essentially, I've heard them called tracking codes or labels. You might use these to organize categories on your site. So if you have a cooking site, you might have pizza, pasta, haggis.
And those are all the tags?
Yeah. These are custom channels. And then lastly, you have URL channels, which are sort of what they sound like. They allow you to group your content into different URLs.
Got it. And this mirrors the existing AdSense Management API.
Yes.
Correct? So if someone is used to calling the AdSense Management API via REST, then this will seem very natural to them.
It's almost identical, and even more so, it mirrors the terminology from the AdSense front end itself.
Great.
So if you're an AdSense publisher and you use the front end, all these terms should be reasonably familiar to you. And if you're a developer, they should be familiar to your users.
Got it.
And then lastly, you have the reports collection, which the reports collection here and the reports generate response. These are almost certainly the most important and useful classes and objects which are in this.
Excellent.
So if I go to the reports collection, you'll see the reports generate method, the only method.
With really good samples too, I see.
Yeah, this is Silvano did a fantastic job building the tutorials.
Who's now with the Google Plus team. Yeah, that's great. And that's great. So so the reason that I wanted to kind of point this out is that this API, so if you're using AdSense today using our REST APIs and you're running it on App Engine or your own local desktop, AppScript provides a cloud-based environment where you're able to plug in pure JavaScript and then automate the reporting aspect of it. And it's easy to get started. Go to script.google.com. And anyone with a Gmail account or Google Apps for Business account can start this. And you're able to very easily get going. So definitely check out the documentation. A lot of good details in there. Check out the tutorial that Silvano wrote that talks about the automation aspect of AdSense. And then we hope soon to share this magic spreadsheet and all the code associated with it. So it acts as a great resource for the community out there. Anything that we missed? I think we covered all the things that we wanted to.
Yeah, I think we covered all the major points.
So so we're super excited to have Nick and show all the cool stuff that he's built, his magic. And we hope to share the code with you very soon, as soon as that's ready and fit for sharing. as soon as there's a way to publish it as well. And we're really excited to see what the community can build with it. I think this, along with a lot of different analytics, the APIs that we have, you can actually take spreadsheets and act as both input and output mechanism for analytics information, because it's so data rich and information heavy that showing it as a chart or showing it as some other alerting based interfaces I think is really valuable. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you, Nick, for joining us as well.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yep, absolutely. See ya.